Within reason, Catholic bishops affirm reasonable policies to curb gun violence. New Year plunge. Wall Street's slide continues as China's economy stumbles and oil prices plummet. Grim anniversary. Pope Francis cautions against inciting violence a year after the Paris Charlie Hebdo massacre. And packing to dinner? A Virginia restaurateur offers discounts to patrons who bear arms. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, January 7th, 2016. Catholic bishops take a stand against gun violence. This as President Obama sells his new gun control package. Good evening, I'm Brian Patrick, and the president joins a televised town hall meeting on that topic tonight. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn has the story.
The White House said it agreed to participate in the town hall event on CNN to, quote, inspire more passion among good people on both sides of the gun control debate. In a speech earlier this week in the East Room of the White House, the president unveiled executive actions to, among other things, close the gun show loophole. One requires anyone who sells a gun for a profit, either online or at a gun show, be required to conduct a background check or face prosecution.
Each time this comes up, we are fed the excuse that common sense reforms like background checks might not have stopped the last massacre. I reject that thinking.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops released this statement yesterday. While no measure can eliminate all acts of violence which involve firearms, we welcome reasonable efforts aimed at saving lives and making communities safer. We hope Congress will take up this issue in a more robust way. The White House today continued its gun control drumbeat.
The president's desire is to engage in a serious conversation, both with people who share his views about common sense steps we can take to make our community safer and keep guns out of the wrong hands, but also have a conversation with those who disagree.
The White House has cited polls like the Pew Research one from July showing that 85% of the public, including 79% of Republicans, favors making private gun sales subject to background checks. CNN invited both sides to participate in the town hall tonight. Both Gun Owners of America and the NRA declined, calling it a PR stunt.
Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Thank you, Lauren. Dr. Chad Pecknold is a theology professor at Catholic University of America. Is there clear Catholic teaching on gun control, Chad?
There is no definitive teaching on gun control. However, the church does teach that we have a right to self-defense, and that includes armed defense.
Isn't there a moral obligation, though, to prevent violent acts?
Yeah, there's a moral obligation to protect our children from evil. There's a moral obligation to protect our neighbors. But to prevent violent acts is a very difficult thing to do, and we have to use our prudential wisdom to do so.
Well, the Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms, and yet this prevalence of guns seems to be causing a great deal of violence. How are we supposed to find a balance there that works for everybody, especially within our faith guidelines?
Yeah, that's right. And this is what the bishops are struggling with, the question of how do we continually support the idea that we have a right to self-defense, but to find an effective way of reducing gun violence. And that's the key phrase there, an effective way. It doesn't seem that as we've gotten more and more restrictive gun laws that we've gotten less gun violence, but more. And that tells us something important, that our legislation is not causing an effective reduction, and that's what we need.
Isn't it really a cultural problem, too, beyond just the guns themselves?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is the question of the principle. We all want peace. We all want to reduce the violence. It's heartbreaking when we see the violence. But we also have to consider what are the policies that will bring about that. And it seems to me that the policies that will bring about that have to do with deeper cultural issues, deeper cultural problems that are causing gun violence. The one common denominator in all the gun shootings, the major mass gun shootings, is that the shooters had absent fathers. That tells us something important. We've got a crisis in the family, which is much more substantial. We've got a crisis in our communities, in our neighborhoods. that we have to deal with those prior problems. As the bishops have also said, we have a problem with Hollywood, with game violence. All of these are root causes that we have to deal with, a sick culture to deal with an effective approach to gun violence.
Dr. Chad Pecknold, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
President Obama promising to veto a bill defunding Planned Parenthood and repealing much of the Affordable Care Act. Now, congressional Republicans are trying a different approach. Jason Calvi reports from Capitol Hill tonight.
Brian, the speaker says Republicans are going on the offensive. First, they vote against Obamacare. Now some are putting together alternatives.
On this vote, the yeas are 240, the nays are 181. The motion is adopted.
A largely party line vote. The Republican House's 62nd attempt to gut Obamacare.
So this is where we truly kick off making this year the year of ideas.
The GOP has promised a replacement for Obamacare for nearly 6 years, and Speaker Ryan says it will be patient-centered. Representative Phil Rowe, a doctor, tells us this month he's aiming to combine two proposals into one Obamacare replacement plan.
If Obamacare is repealed, people might lose their health care. Is that a fear of
look,
yours?
What they presented yesterday was they talked about all these people. Well, I'm one of those people. I lost my health insurance and had to buy on the D.C. exchange here. Many people had health insurance that served their families very well and now lost that insurance and had to buy a more expensive.
The Obamacare repeal last night is the first to reach the president's desk.
Getting past the Senate Democrats has always been the issue, and finally we cracked the code.
Republicans used a special once-a-year process called reconciliation, which allows them to get around a Senate filibuster with just a simple majority. The bill would also strip Planned Parenthood of nearly $450 million, instead diverting it to other health care providers.
This Republican bill to defund Planned Parenthood is an insult to the intelligence and judgment of women. It's a waste of time and taxpayer dollars.
So there you have it, the clear differences between Republicans and Democrats signaled in this first big vote of 2016, this election year. Speaker Ryan says they still haven't figured out if or when the House will vote on a replacement to Obamacare. Brian?
Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Intensifying worries about China's economy and dropping oil prices drive stocks much lower again today. On the heels of already heavy losses this week, the Dow Jones Industrial Average falls 392 points today. The Nasdaq lost 146 points, the S&P 500 47 points. David Lipton is a professor at the School of Law at Catholic University of America, director of the Securities Law Program. Good to have you with us, David.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
2016 getting off to a very rough start for investors. What's causing all this volatility?
Well, I'm not a prophet nor a soothsayer, but there are a couple of things that we could look at that are very apparent. What's going on with the economy of China is probably paramount. It seems to be almost a perfect storm. We have the tension in the Mideast. We have the incredible movement of immigrants all around the world. And we have the price of oil dropping precipitously, which you would normally think would be good, but it puts people out of work and it decreases production of facilities that accommodate the oil industry.
People with investments, especially those closer to retirement, are looking at this going, whoa, we're really losing. Is there anything we can do?
Well, the easy answer is it's too late, because by the time you see it, the market's probably already in a position of correcting itself, albeit George Soros advised from Sri Lanka yesterday that this is the beginning of 2008 all over again. How he knows that, I don't know. But I would say that if you're going to be an investor, you have to hang tight and you have to take the good with the bad. And we have to remember that everything that happened in 2008, 2009, we bounced back by about 300% from where we ended up.
It takes time, though. Any specific direction or advice for Catholic investors?
Well, I would say that the advice for Catholic investors is the same as the advice for anyone else. In my classes, I do emphasize The societal investment instruments, we have benefit corporations, we have special investment bonds, we have corporations that have a track record of looking after the community and are known for that. And you don't necessarily get the same return, but it's a hair off. And every major investment advisory firm has a social fund of that sort.
But it will not protect you from these kinds of dips and
no, nothing will.
We're seeing right
nothing
now.
will.
David Lipton from CUA, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And an armed standoff in Oregon is getting some neighbors up in arms. Protesters occupying a wildlife refuge claim the federal government is violating land rights. Local ranchers want the protesters to leave, saying they don't represent them.
I'm proud to be a rancher, and I'm not going to let some other people be my face.
There is a time to go home. We recognize that. We don't feel it's quite time yet.
Community members met with the sheriff last night. He says he's trying to end that standoff quickly and peacefully. A French prosecutor opens a terrorism investigation after a man tries to break into a Paris police station. They say he was wielding a knife and carrying fake explosives. French officers shot and killed the man today just before noon local time. He is said to have shouted Allah Akbar as he stormed the station. Police say he carried a piece of paper with an ISIS emblem on it. Investigators believe he acted alone. Today's violence comes 1 year almost to the minute since. Now a new edition of that satirical magazine stirs up more controversy. As Wyatt Goolsby reports, it's drawing criticism from the Vatican's newspaper.
Tensions remain high in France less than 2 months after 130 people were killed in attacks claimed by ISIS. Today, security in Paris is heightened as citizens show respect for those who died 1 year ago today in another terror attack. 2 Islamic extremists burst into the office of the satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo, killing 12 people. Over the next 2 days, an accomplice shot a policewoman to death and then stormed a kosher supermarket, killing 4 hostages. The Vatican's newspaper is criticizing Charlie Hebdo's special edition marking the anniversary. The cover shows a bearded god carrying a rifle with the words, "The killer is still out there." The Vatican editorial board says the French magazine once again forgets what religious leaders of all creeds have been repeating. Using God to justify hate is blasphemy. They reference Pope Francis, who commented on the Hebdo attack last year.
Sì, dottor Gasparri, grande amico, mi dice una parolaccia contro la mia mamma, ma ti aspetta un pugno.
The Holy Father saying, if my good friend insults my mother, he'll get punched for it. This is normal. We cannot provoke others. We cannot insult their faith. We cannot mock their faith. Ilan Scalome is part of Coexister, an interreligious movement of young people in France. He says the goal of the terrorists is to divide. His group's solution, promote inclusion and solidarity.
I think it's very important to help people that are from different beliefs, from different origin, from different location within the country, to see that we can be French together and it could think it very positively.
The editor-in-chief of Charlie Hebdo says since last year they've invested about $2 million to secure their Paris office. They haven't changed their editorial line when it comes to content. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. And after North Korea touts its hydrogen bomb experiment, China is caught between a rock and a hard place. Simon Denyer, China bureau chief of the Washington Post, talking with us from Beijing, says China is frustrated with its smaller neighbor but doesn't know what to do about it.
China does not want to completely isolate North Korea or do anything which will bring down the regime. That's the bottom line for China, and it's always been the bottom line for China. It doesn't want instability. It doesn't want refugees flooding across the border, and it certainly doesn't want a reunified Korea, which is an ally of Washington, right on its border.
Denyer tells me on EWTN Radio's Morning Glory today that China's influence over North Korea is waning. He says there's currently little direct communication between the two governments. Well, Orthodox Christians celebrate Christmas today. They go by the Julian calendar, not the Gregorian calendar we use. There are celebrations around the world. The Egyptian president shows solidarity with Coptic Christians. He joins them for Christmas Mass in Cairo and vows to repair Coptic churches damaged in sectarian attacks. Orthodox Russians also celebrate Christmas today. President Vladimir Putin attended midnight Mass at a church in a village northwest of Moscow. The Russian Orthodox Patriarch celebrated a televised Mass at Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow. And people in Georgia processing through the country's capital. That parade dates back centuries. After attending Christmas Mass, the faithful would walk the streets collecting for charity. The traditional procession was banned during Soviet rule. It was restored in the year 2000. Coming up, the Catholic response to historic flooding in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And medical marijuana is now available to New Yorkers.
Il figlio di Dio si è fatto carne.
The Holy Father celebrating morning Mass today in the Vatican. He encourages us to live the works of mercy. He says the Son of God became flesh, visiting the sick, feeding the hungry, and caring for the abandoned. Thanks for joining us this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. It's a long road to recovery for Midwest flood victims. Catholics offer them strong support. Historic winter flooding left more than 24 dead in Illinois and Missouri. Thousands suffered major material losses. The Archbishop of St. Louis says the church and its members are helping in very practical ways.
School and church as a shelter, although later it was established someplace else. Something as simple as letting people park their boats and cars and their other vehicles in our parking lots that are dry and above flood stage. Catholic Charities, of course, is handling some of the day-to-day needs and continues to do that.
Archbishop Carlson says parishes around St. Louis also plan to take up a special collection for flood relief at Sunday Masses. New York becomes the latest state allowing medical marijuana. 8 dispensaries open for business today. State lawmakers approved the medical marijuana program they called the Compassionate Care Act 18 months ago. Only non-smokable forms of medical marijuana are now available in the Empire State. New guidelines recommend limiting the amount of added sugars in our diet to about 12 teaspoons of sugar a day. That seems like a lot, but a single can of Coke contains about 10 teaspoons. The good news, natural sugars in foods like raisins, apples, or milk are not considered added sugars, so they don't count. Schools in Nebraska consider new rules for transgender student athletes. The Nebraska Catholic Conference urges the schools to have students compete based on their sex at birth. Sheri Ricket is Skyping with us from Lincoln, Nebraska. She's General Counsel and Policy Director for the Nebraska Catholic Conference. Sheri, could you give us just a very brief background on the controversy over high school transgender student athletes and the state policy there?
Yes, our High School Activities Association, apparently under threat from the ACLU, is debating right now whether to adopt a policy that would allow students to participate according to their gender preference. So, for example, a male student who identifies as a girl would be able to participate on girl sports, and a girl who identifies as a male could participate on boy sports. And we're supposed to have votes coming up, key votes within the next week on where that issue is going to go.
The Catholic bishops there in Nebraska have issued a statement. Can you summarize their concerns for us?
Yes, of course, they're very concerned for the students with gender dysphoria, that they need to be treated with respect and compassion. But they're also concerned that all the students need to have their rights respected, including their right to privacy and to safety. And then in the statement that they issued earlier this week, they also point out the gender dysphoria, or the gender ideology, it undermines the fundamental nature of the human person and the family. And so this ideology should not influence the teaching and the activities in our schools. And when they say that, they're just reflecting what's been expressed by Pope Francis and before him by Pope Benedict and by other church leaders.
And Sheri, how could the church and we as Catholics respond to this transgender issue that so few of us really understand?
I think it's really important for people to become informed about this, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially the way that's being presented by social media and the entertainment and general media industries. And so it'd be helpful if they would take the time to learn about it, especially from the church's perspective and in accordance with church teaching. And then we could really use more bishops speaking about this and priests learning about it and teaching about it as well. It's an extremely important issue.
It is. And how can we follow the situation there in Nebraska? Do you have a website?
We do at necatholic.org. That's NE, the abbreviation for Nebraska Catholic.org.
necatholic.org. Sheri Ricket joining us from Lincoln by Skype. Thank you so much for being with us, Sheri.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, diving into icy water. They say it makes you feel good. And patrons who pack guns can get a discount on the gumbo at this Cajun restaurant. On Thursday, January 7th. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. As politicians fought over gun control this week, a Virginia restaurant opens its arms to diners bearing arms. Catherine Szeltner takes us there tonight.
The Cajun Experience in historic Leesburg, Virginia, packs Louisiana flavor inside these walls. But it's what the customers are packing that may surprise you.
I don't think, we should be discriminated against because you carry a gun or own a gun.
Each week, the restaurant hosts Second Amendment Wednesday. Patrons get 10% off their bill if they bring a gun. From the decorations to the food, the dining experience here is definitely Cajun. And with all the guns around, that experience, the owner says, is the American one.
Ultimately, it's our right under the Constitution, and the government should uphold that right for us.
Owner Brian Crosswhite also runs 2AO, a group that connects and educates pro-Second Amendment businesses. The gun enthusiast says President Obama went about executive actions in the wrong way, but the orders are the right move.
One of the actions is to increase the FBI so we can do more, to be able to handle the background checks. We should applaud that.
The executive actions also require anyone in the business of selling a firearm to get a license.
It's like having a restaurant. You should be able to have a health license. So if you're going to sell food, you have to have a health license. I think it's the same thing.
As Washington policies continue to change, this Virginia restaurant's support for gun rights can't be masked. Reporting from Leesburg, Virginia, Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. The health care repeal bill passed by Congress now awaits a certain veto from the president. That means Obamacare stays intact, and it also prevents defunding Planned Parenthood. Marjorie Dannefelser, president of Susan B. Anthony List, is joining us. So this bill is still being called historic. Why?
Yes, it's historic because in 40 years of the federal government funding Planned Parenthood, there has never been one vote in the House or in the Senate that led to a bill being passed and sent to the President of the United States. There's not been 40 years, in all those 40 years, even oversight at all. These are all happening now. So this bill hitting the president's desk is an historic moment. It truly is.
It will be vetoed. Does it get us any closer to defunding Planned Parenthood, or is it strictly symbolic?
Well, as we all know, there's only one step left. The only step left is a new president who will actually sign this bill. We knew from the very beginning that he would not. But what is really important is clarity in politics and in life. To see him vetoing that bill shows us a contrast between himself and Hillary Clinton and any of the Republican pro-life nominees who are coming up. When we have one of those guys or woman in the Oval Office, we will defund Planned Parenthood and send those funds to deserving organizations.
I'm really interested in the fact sheet put together by the Susan B. Anthony List. You compiled this sheet based on Planned Parenthood's own data, right?
Yes, every year they put out an annual report and we do our own analysis of it. They usually do it at a very quiet time and hopefully nobody notices, but we always do. This time we saw a dramatic dip in services for cancer screenings, STDs, contraception, and stagnant rate of abortions, meaning they remain the same, and yet a dramatic increase in funding from the federal government, meaning you and me and everybody watching. So what their claims are that they are about the whole health of the whole woman, they are truly not. Every year those services I mentioned decline, and either the abortion rate goes up or it stays about the same, which is this year.
Interesting statistics. Marjorie Dannefelser, the Susan B. Anthony List, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And it's a new record. The Powerball jackpot is up to $700 million. Nobody matched all the winning numbers in last night's drawing, so the top prize gets even bigger for the next drawing on Saturday night. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and we leave you tonight with this chilling Orthodox Christmas celebration in Russia, the Winter Swimming Club celebrating with warm-ups in the snow, followed by an icy dip. They believe the frigid plunge makes them healthier. Good for them, and good night, and God bless you.